Hey guys, hope everyone's doing well today. I thought I'd step outside here for a second and make a quick vlog. No, I said it'd be on at 5 o'clock. A little bit late, got busy typing, lost track of time. Shocker, I know. Anyway, wanted to take a quick minute. We've been covering on our Thursday night at 6:30. So we have a meetup, a community worship time at 6:30 p.m. on Thursdays. And what we do is we get together. We usually open with a doxology. Doxology seems to be the sort of our song we get started with. So we always get started with the doxology. And then we use a psalm to pray. I ask everybody to read a psalm or read a passage or a portion of a psalm. And we'll read that portion of the psalm. And then we will pray that together. Some great things sometimes, I think, to pray the psalms. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his book Life Together, says sometimes when you don't have words of your own to pray, the words of the Psalms are really good. And I notice a lot of us quote the Psalms even when we do pray. They're so interwoven into our lives as believers. So one of the things we try and do is really have the Psalms take an important role in the prayers of believers. So we do that. We sing the doxology, then we read a psalm and pray a psalm, and then we have a discussion. And so I've been leading the discussion in essential principles of discipleship. And I was telling some folks today I lead a devotion with Rescue One, a ministry I also work with. So they're a real blessing. You should look them up on Facebook as well, like their page. Wonderful folks doing great work. Opening Liara's house this week. It's been open officially, or at least on paper, but now it's official open. They're taking their first clients. So a lot of stuff going on at Rescue One. Sneak over there and like their page if you would. And also, so I was leading devotions there as I do every Friday practically. And I was talking about how I came about these essential principles of discipleship. And so when I was originally started as a student pastor and I was working with students, and I had to ask this question, like, what is it to make disciples? I'd been a disciple for nearly 10 years, and you'd think that question had occurred to me before, but shamefully it hadn't. What was it to be a disciple? And I'd realized that I had grown up in general with a classroom view of discipleship. And so while I was very doctrinally grounded and I tended to be pretty sound at that time, I hadn't considered the role of, say, that prayer had played in my discipleship, or that fasting had played in my discipleship. Some of the actions, giving had played in discipleship. So I realized I was only teaching like a doctrinal sort of view of discipleship. I really wasn't teaching like a more full-orbed head aspect, which is a doctrinal aspect, but there's also a heart aspect too, where we should be cultivating what Jonathan Edwards called holy longings, or what we would talk about holy attitudes. And what we mean by that is like the Beatitudes are a great example. Blessed are the poor in spirit, pure in heart, meekness in our lives, right? Mourning, etc., hungering and thirsting after righteousness, having holy longings in our life. That I had only been doing the head aspect, and I was hoping that the head aspect would really cultivate the heart aspect. I did need a change of heart, and I did know that. I did need to grow in that area. But as a lot of people have noted, one of the longest distances in all of humanity is a distance between the head and the heart. Sometimes that distance seems deeper than the deepest ocean. And so I realized that there was a role for my hands to play too, that the actions I had taken had really helped to cultivate my heart, that it wasn't just a doctrinal knowledge I needed, but it was a personal, intimate knowledge I gained through communion with God, which giving, prayer, fasting, serving the poor also, and resting on the Sabbath day, giving the day unto the Lord, was really crucial to my discipleship in my life. So anyway, I realized there was a head, heart, hands. But since that time, I've noticed that there are other essential principles too. Not just head, heart, and hands, but there's some upfront principles. And I'm going to take those from Matthew. So last week we talked about the first discipleship essential, and that was this, that you not have any terms when you follow Christ. Christ is the master. He gives the terms. You are the disciple. You lay down your terms. So coming to Christ without any terms was really important. We see that when Jesus has his disciples there on the Sea of Galilee, right as he's about to sail over, when he calms the wind and the waves in the sea there in Matthew 8. And in Matthew 8, two people come up to Jesus and they say, "Hey, Master, I'll follow you wherever I go." And Jesus basically responds, "Look, there's no Holiday Inn on the other side of this. The Son of Man doesn't have any place to lay his head." And then another guy comes and says, "Let me go bury my father, then I'll follow you." And Jesus says, "No, you let the dead bury their dead." You see how he was rejecting their terms, how they had terms either hidden when in the man who asked that he or who said, "I'll follow you wherever you go." Jesus knows there's a hidden term, and that's that there's some place to stay when they get over on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And so Jesus tells them that they must reject their terms. They must get on the boat. And all those got on the boat. It says, and his disciples got on the boat there in verse 23 in chapter 8. And then they sail. You see the wind and the waves and the sea calmed. They say, "What manner of man is this?" They get over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and two demoniacs run out and they say, "What have you to do with us, Jesus, Son of God? Have you come to torment us before the time?" And those disciples that saw those wind and waves and sea and heard those demoniacs, they respond very differently in Matthew 9 when Jesus forgives the sin of the paralytic, or when Jesus calls Matthew the tax collector, when Jesus eats with Matthew and his friends around his table. They don't respond the way the Pharisees do, or John the Baptist does. It's very important that we do not have any terms to following Christ. Now that's Matthew 8, and in Matthew 9, as I just said, is basically a series of conflicts that Jesus has with the Pharisees and John the Baptist disciples, and then Jesus' disciples respond differently than John the Baptist disciples do. So Matthew 10, then we see Jesus actually call his disciples for the first time. At the end of Matthew 9, he says, "Pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest." And then Jesus does exactly, Jesus is one who practices what he preaches. He does the exact thing he tells them to do. He sets aside 12 laborers, fishermen. Really just laborers, men who are true laborers. They don't meet any APEST models. Read a lot of church planter books. These guys don't match any of the core teachings of what we need to plant churches according to a lot of the church planting books. So Jesus calls 12 disciples. And then in the rest of Matthew 10, he tasks them and tells them what they're going to do. And so this the first one comes from Matthew 8, not to have any terms. The second one comes from there in Matthew 10, 5 through 15, where Jesus tells them, "Freely you received, freely you give. Don't take any extra shoes or a staff. Don't take a purse. Don't take coins in your purse. Don't take an extra shirt with you. When you enter a town, look for someone who's worthy and let them take you in. If you can't find anybody worthy, leave that town and shake the dust off from your feet." But the real point here, I'm going to change hands. The real point here is that not only should they not have any terms, but they shouldn't be doing anything for worldly gain, for financial gain in the world. Jesus forbids them to do anything in ministry for financial gain. We must abandon the idea that worldly gain, is part of the reason that should motivate us. We have to completely abandon our terms for following Jesus. We can't have any terms, but we also cannot be looking for financial gain. This is an interesting principle for me, because when I was about 18, I thought I wanted to follow the Lord. I'd gotten in trouble legally. I had been a terrible, desperate sinner, as we all are, but some of mine were more public sins than many other people's. And so I'd gotten in some trouble with the law, and I started going to church. But what I wanted was my reputation back. I really just wanted, not my life to not be a wreck. And as soon as Jesus fulfilled my terms, I went right back out into the world. I didn't last, not even 6 months. And I went right back out into the world and did those things that I wanted to do. I lived in hell for 4 years, from 18 to 22 on the earth, because of my disobedience of the Lord. And I'm thankful that he was gracious to me, and he did bring those judgments in my life that brought me to Christ. However, when I wanted to come to Christ at 18, it was not because I wanted to follow Christ, because he was the Son of God and had been raised from the dead and had died on the cross for me. The reason I came to Christ was because I had some terms I needed Jesus to meet, and once those terms were met, I abandoned the faith. And so God was gracious to me in that he allowed me another time and another season, and he called me to himself during that time. But just from my own life, there's a good example of how we cannot have terms and we cannot be looking for financial gain. So those are the two really first principles before we can even really begin to discuss prayer or giving or any of the practices, or before we can discuss sort of essential theological beliefs, which we use here at Solomon's Porch. We use the Nicene Creed to give those essential Christian doctrines to us as a 101, as far as what's the floor, what's the very base of that the Christian needs to believe. We use the Nicene Creed for that. And we use as far as our doctrinal beliefs, that's the Nicene Creed. And as far as our heart beliefs, as cultivation of those holy longings, we use the Beatitudes from Matthew 5. And then for our hands aspect, we talk head, what we believe, heart, what we should feel and cultivate, and then hands, like what comes together with those beliefs to help us cultivate our heart. And those are from Matthew 6, giving, prayer, fasting. Jesus in Matthew 6 says, when you give like this. When you pray, pray like this. When you fast like this. It's not an option. Jesus expects his disciples to continue those three practices. And so then if we ask, well, what is a biblical fast? We find ourselves in Isaiah 58. So we can clothe the naked, feed the hungry, take the homeless poor in our houses. Serve the poor becomes our fourth act. And at the end of Isaiah 58, combined with Matthew 12 as well, we see that Sabbath is a very important practice. We turn our foot from doing our own will and keep the Sabbath day. He'll make us ride on the heights. So before we can talk, though, about what the sort of 101 doctrines are, before what we can talk about what those holy longings are we should be cultivating, before we can talk about what those practices are that we should be practicing in the Christian life that come together to make a disciple, before that, we have to talk about first principles. And first principles are, you can't have any terms. That's the first principle. No terms. From Matthew 8. And the second principle beginning in Matthew 10. You can't be looking for worldly gain. We'll pick up next week. I'll give you the third essential principle taken out of Matthew 10, taken from Jesus' lecture to his disciples in Matthew 10. Remember, we meet on Sunday morning at 10:30. Come out, enjoy worship with us, share a meal with us, take the Lord's table with us, sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with us. And then at the end, you'll be free to go, but you won't have to. We're trying to build a Christian community. It's what we're called Solomon's Porch Christian Community. I find sometimes when I say the word church, people think of buildings and steeples and brick and mortar or parking lots or programs. We should not. You should be thinking about Christian community. So we are Solomon's Porch Christian Community. So we say Solomon's Porch is not an event to attend, but it's a community to be a part of. So come be a part of us. We're preaching this week out of Galatians chapter 4. We're doing an extended study right now, taking a little break from the book of Matthew. I've been preaching through for quite some time, and we're talking through how does the New Testament then talk about the law of God. I believe we're on about the fourth sermon in that series. You can check out our YouTube page by searching for Solomon's Porch. You'll find us there, and in our YouTube page, you can find all the sermons preached up to now on that. How does God talk about the law in the New Testament? You can also find our entire series in Matthew, and then there's also a short series from last summer from the book of Proverbs. We'll have some other series we're going to be putting up from the past. If you were with us ever on Sunday nights or Sunday afternoons, we still have those series as well. We'll be putting those up. I hope we can help you grow in your discipleship. You're following the Lord Jesus Christ, and that you can find great joy in serving the Lord Jesus Christ. That's our hope for you. That's what we want to do for those disciples that are committed to Solomon's Porch. And if you're looking for a body or you have any questions about following the Lord Jesus Christ, don't hesitate to message me. May the Lord richly bless you. Thanks. Bye-bye.